Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with pork saltimbocca. That's right, besides their great taste, the thing I love about Italian recipes is that they always have the most interesting names. I mean, there's tiramisu, which means pick-me-up, tortellini, which means belly buttons, and of course pasta puttanesca, which also means something in Italian. But I believe my favorite is saltimbocca, since that translates to jumps in the mouth, which is pretty much the most accurate recipe name ever. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. And first up, we're going to need to trim and portion one pork tenderloin, which run about 1.25 pounds each. And what we'll do using a nice thin sharp knife is remove what we call the silver skin. So we'll slide the knife under and trim that off as shown wherever we see it. And by the way, some of that softer white fat on the surface you can just leave. We're mostly just removing those tougher silvery membranes. And what you're going to notice after removing most of those is that there's more meat at the top than at the bottom of the tenderloin. Okay, that extra meat up there is sometimes referred to as the head. And we could just leave it on, but it makes it harder to portion. So once this is trimmed up, I do like to remove that, cutting where it sort of naturally separates. And if we want, we could finish trimming that up and use it as an extra portion, but I'm not going to do that. I'm actually going to add that to the rest of the scraps to make our pan sauce even better. But we will get to that. What we're going to do once we've trimmed off that silver skin, and maybe trimmed up those ends a little bit, is cut that into 2 pieces, sort of cheating up a little bit towards the bigger end. And what we're trying to accomplish after cutting each of those pieces in half is to get 4 pieces roughly about the same size. Give or take. No one's going to measure. So those are looking pretty good. And what I'm going to do is transfer those into the fridge while I deal with my scraps. And by deal with, I mean chop up really fine. So I'm going to take a cleaver and mince up all the trimmings and extra meat. And again, you could have trimmed off that extra piece we took off the top and got 1 extra small portion, but it's only a couple ounces. And as you're about to see, it's going to help make our pan sauce even more rich and delicious. Because what we're going to do once all that stuff is chopped is add it to a saucepan where we've melted about 1 tablespoon of butter. And we're going to cook that over medium-high heat until it's caramelized and nicely browned, which I believe are the same thing. So we'll go ahead and cook that stirring until it looks a little something like this. At which point we're going to go ahead and dump in some chicken stock, preferably homemade, or what I'm using here. And then in a little bit of a plot twist, we're also going to add in 1 teaspoon of unflavored gelatin powder. And we will stir that in. And then last but not least, we will add some nice cold fresh water. Because what we're going to do is simmer this slowly for about 1.5 hours to basically simulate a nice, rich, sticky pork stock. Which is exactly why we added that gelatin, since that's what naturally comes out of the bones when we make a real stock. So we will adjust our heat so that's simmering nice and slowly. And like I said, we'll let that cook for about 1.5 hours or so. Okay, you could probably get away with 1 hour, but the longer the better. And if you need to add some water to it, go ahead. We don't want it drying out. And I should mention, if you want to skip this entire step, I will let you know how to do that in the blog post. And then what we can do while our cheater pork stock is working is go ahead and finish prepping our pork. And to do that, we're going to want to pound out these pieces of pork between 2 pieces of plastic. Not too thin. Maybe somewhere between 1/4 and 1/8 of an inch. And then what we'll do once those have been flattened is remove that top piece of plastic and flip these over. Which seems like an unnecessary step, but it's not. And then once those are turned over, we'll go ahead and season that side generously with kosher salt, as well as freshly ground black pepper. And then we'll finish those off with just a very, very light dusting of flour. Okay, so just put a couple teaspoons in your hand, and then space your fingers a little bit apart as you shake your fist, and that will allow you to dust these very lightly with flour. And then once that's set, we'll go ahead and flip these back over to the side we pounded, which is always going to be a little rougher than that other side. And then what we'll do before we get to the good stuff is sprinkle this side with a little bit of pepper, but no salt or flour. Okay, the prosciutto we're going to put on here is salty enough. So we will just season this side with a little bit of pepper. At which point we're going to press on our fresh whole sage leaves. Okay, and for me, the perfect amount is 3. Okay, I don't think 2's enough, and I believe 4 is too many. But of course, that's going to be totally up to you. You are, after all, the Jimmy Page of applying the sage. So go ahead and put as many leaves as you want. And then once our pounded pork has been saged, we will move on to the last and probably most important ingredient. Our thinly sliced prosciutto ham. So we will take some of that and somehow tear it or cut it into several pieces, enough to cover the sage and go all the way to the edges of the pork. And yes, it's totally fine to overlap, and probably an advantage. So we'll go ahead and drape some of that over our sage. Like I said, fully covering that surface. And then once that's set, we will want to give this one last gentle pounding. So we'll lay some plastic back over the top, except this time we're just going to pound it very lightly. Okay, we're just making sure that prosciutto sticks to the pork. And then what we'll do once those have been hammed and very lightly slammed is transfer those to a plate or tray, because I really think we should wrap these up and transfer them into the fridge for at least a half hour so they're nice and cold when we fry them. Okay, if you're totally starving, I'll say this is optional, but I do think they come out better if they hit the pan when they're nice and cold. So I did pop mine in the fridge. And what we can do while we're waiting is check our fake pork stock, which as you can see, mine has reduced nicely. And for whatever reason, if yours still has a lot of liquid, just go ahead and turn up the heat and try to reduce that down to about a half cup or so. And then what we'll do at this point is go ahead and strain it so it's ready to use. And thanks to those brown pork scraps, plus that little bit of gelatin we added, we are going to have a nice, rich, sticky, flavorful broth, which as you will see, we're going to use to create our pan sauce. So we will strain that and set it aside. And then assuming our meat has been chilled, we can go ahead and pull that out, unwrap it, and proceed to cook our saltimbocca, which by the way is going to take a shockingly short amount of time. So what we'll do is place a nice big skillet over high heat, to which we've added a couple tablespoons of olive oil. And once that's shimmering and we think it's nice and hot, and it's just about to start smoking, we will place in our pieces of pork prosciutto side down. And we're going to let that side cook about 3 minutes. And while that ham should prevent it from sticking to the bottom, since I did sort of crowd the pan, I'm going to go around with my spatula, because I could see it was kind of sticking to the outside of the pan. So I made sure that was loose so there's no problems when we flip this. And like I said, we're going to let that first side cook for about 3 minutes, since we really do want that prosciutto to caramelize and crust up nicely. And what you're going to see after about 2.5 to 3 minutes is that heat rising up through the meat, and our edges are going to turn white. And once it looks like this, we'll go ahead and carefully turn it over, and we will just give the second side about a minute. Alright, since these pieces were just about all the way cooked through. So we will give that second side about 60 seconds, at which point I like to turn off the heat. And I'm going to go ahead and transfer those onto some nice warm plates, and place those in a warm spot or in a warm oven while I finish the sauce. So with the heat off, what I like to do is take a paper towel and go ahead and blot up any of that excess oil, at which point we will add some white wine to the still very, very hot pan, as well as our strained pork broth. And at that point we can turn our heat back to high and simply cook this until it reduces down and thickens up a little bit, which I'm going to guess takes about 4 to 5 minutes. And just to throw out a measurement, I'll say reduce it by about half, but I'm probably going to go a little bit under that. And when I think it's getting close, I will taste it, and if necessary, season it with some salt, which I did. And since it's impossible to see with all this steam, let me go ahead and turn it off, so you can see exactly how far I went. And that's it. Thanks to all that amazingly delicious goodness that was caramelized onto the bottom, plus our wine and broth, we've just created a very simple but intensely flavored sauce. So let's go ahead and spoon our piping hot sauce over our still warm meat. And then I finish mine off with a few extra leaves of sage, for the pictures. And that, my friends, is one of the most gorgeous culinary concoctions of all time. I mean, look how beautiful this came out. I know, you're not supposed to compliment yourself. But hey, I'm the only one here. And as stunning as this looks, it tastes even better. Hence the name. I mean, the flavors really do jump in your mouth. And what happened here is that prosciutto caramelized. All that hot sizzling pork fat kind of exploded that sage flavor into the meat, creating just this amazing level of savoriness. Not to mention textures. Since we have that sort of crusty ham exoskeleton attached to that still moist tender pork. So there is really nothing I don't love about this dish. And really, once that little bit of trimming's done and your meat's pounded, it's actually a very easy recipe to make. But anyway, that's it. Pork saltimbocca, the dish formerly known as veal saltimbocca. But these days, people don't think it's cool to eat young cows anymore. Okay, people are fine with young pigs, but young cows not so much. But regardless of whether you use pork or veal, I really do hope you give this a try soon. So head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.